Hello, my name is Marcus Sankofa Nicks. I am from the United States, the state of Maryland.
Hello and welcome to Obehi Podcast. I'm your host, Obehi A14, and I strongly believe that everyone has a story to share. Now let's get started into this episode.
I have been an educator in the school system, in the public school system of Maryland for 12 years. Recently, since then, I transitioned into establishing and starting a consulting company supporting educators, teachers, school systems and school districts throughout the state of Maryland and beyond throughout the country. I am a historian specializing in the area of African American studies and African American history. I also am a museum consultant and work with museums. And so I work really with students. As a teacher, I work with those who support students, educators, principals, administrators, psychologists, parents, families, and so that is in a nutshell of that is a little bit about me. And I'll also say I obtained my master's in African American Studies from the historically Black university, the HBCU, Morgan State University, and I'm glad to be on this platform to talk.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to have you here because being an African historian, that is a lot of things you are going to teach us because we love history. We love our history. We need to talk about us. If we talk about our history every day of the year, it will still not be too much.
Right.
All right. So everyone has a story to tell. We absolutely believe this to be true. So we're going to learn first about you before we learn what you do. So I want you to tell me a little bit about your background growing up in the United States, because this helped me now to understand who you are. What do you remember of your young adolescent years?
Sure. So I am the only child, no siblings, no brothers or sisters. And so it's, coming up, I was in a household where it was my mother, my father, and myself. I attended school like any other child. And for the most part, as much as I can recall and remember, I enjoyed my educational experience at school. I had a very loving and supportive, caring family, not just my immediate mother and father, but my relatives and my extended community. I was very much involved in church. Church was a huge part of my family's life, with my father being a Baptist minister. But I would say that education was always something that my parents were really that was a strong value in my family for education. I know that my parents didn't have at times opportunities to be able to get the kind of education that they would have wanted, and so here I come as their child, and so they wanted to make sure that I had a chance to obtain education in ways that they couldn't, just with them being my parents and wanting me to be able to have opportunities that they didn't have when they were younger. One of the things that I recently shared in a training that I did with over 80 plus teachers, educators, professionals in educational settings here in the States, in Maryland. A couple weeks ago, I shared a story of how when I was in elementary school.
We believe that everyone has a story to share. We believe in the power of storytelling in today's digital economy. Yes, we believe that our audience need to be touched at the level of emotion so we can better engage. What about you? Do you believe in storytelling as much as we do? Do you want to reach the hearts and minds of your audience? Then join us in our online training class, Storytelling for Content Creators and Digital Entrepreneurs. Come to obehi1food.com/storytelling and learn how to leverage your storytelling skills so you can earn more as a content creator and digital entrepreneur. Storytelling is a powerful instrument at our disposal. Let's explore it together. See you in the class.
And for here in the United States, in Maryland, public school, you usually have elementary school broken down into 5 grades, grades 1 through 5. And so the primary demographic for teachers in the school system here are white females or white women, even though there are others from different nationalities, ethnicities, and walks of life in the school system. And so as a young Black male, as an African American boy in school, grades 1, 2, 3, and 4 on into grades 5, I never had a Black teacher. All of my teachers were pretty much, as I can reflect and think on it, were white women. And so I got to 5th grade and I had a white teacher again. But this time my 5th grade experience was a little bit different because there was a gentleman, and I'll say his name. I'm sure he probably doesn't mind. His name was Mr. Ron Morris. And so he was a tall Black man. He was one of the 5th grade teachers, and his class was right next to my class. And even though I didn't have him as a teacher, I could hear him next door. I could hear the things he was saying. His students seemed to enjoy him as a teacher. Many of his colleagues and the other teachers seemed to like being around him. He dressed professionally. He was charismatic. And I always wondered what it'd be like to have him as my teacher as a Black man. And I always wondered how it would be with him. And so as I got older, I started to reflect on things like that more. And so here I am today. So like I said, I had a very encouraging, enriching background experience that played a significant part of what led me to be who I am today.
In those times, there was no Black teacher in the school when you school as a young adolescent, correct?
Correct. Not many.
Okay, but why? Because there were no Black people, or because there were no Black people didn't want to teach in the school?
So at the time, I wasn't really sure. Just like any other student, I was just going to school, and whoever was my teacher, that was my teacher. It was when I got into the school system myself in my own right in the later years that, and also my education, going to grad school and doing history and research on Black teachers, the those of African descent in the educational sector, those in the field of education. It was the reading and the study and the research and the things that I uncovered that helped me to connect the dots and helped me to have a deeper understanding of that case study experience that I encountered when I was in 5th grade. So here we have a Black male teacher who is on an island of his own. He's one teacher amongst so many other teachers who are predominantly white women. What I discovered as a result of my research, as a result of going to libraries, going into archival repositories, going through books, reading up on scholars who devoted study and research to the history of the Black teachers in education. What I discovered was history really, when you go back into time, you could see a long historical memory of what happened to teachers and what led so many teachers, especially Black teachers, to leave the profession. You see historically, and when I say historically, you can go to Well, since the moment those of African descent have been brought here from the shores of Africa or from the Caribbean or various places, educators and linguists and teachers have always been some of what has been brought here to experience the unfortunate situation of enslavement. And as you fast forward, even though there were laws in place called anti-literacy laws to keep the enslaved from being able to read, being able to write, being able to grapple and engage with the written word, there still were teachers. There still were Black teachers, those of African descent who risked their life, who found clever ways, who carved out sacred spaces, secret spaces, private spaces to still be able to uh, become literate, to be able to read and to write, because becoming literate would give you a chance to do the things that you could do to exercise what it meant to be free. And so as you fast forward, many Black educators lost their jobs. When you go to Brown versus Board of Education, and when you talk about segregation and how things were separate amongst whites and Blacks, but then as you transition to that integration stage, many Black teachers lost their lives. They were demoted. They had to look for work in other arenas, and so that played a huge part as to why the Black teacher shortage became a real thing to grapple with, and it had a huge, huge, huge impact on education and on children who benefited so much from having these Black educators in their midst.
And the consequence of that is huge. It's not small at all. It have
Right.
a ripple effect on the people. If, like you say now, you are a young adolescent going to school, even as a young person, you could feel that there was something not right in it, that there was no person like you that is teaching you. And, so people think that the job of a teacher is simple. You just go there and teach children. But it is deeper than that. It's a deep work. It's just like the work of the person who sits at the altar or who stands at the altar and preach to you. These two jobs are not simple jobs. These are basically people that are configuring the head of the people. Because what you learn from school and also in the church or in the mosque, wherever you go to worship, those things touches your emotion. They form your identity. They tell you who you are. At that place, at that point, you can build or you can destroy something, because you are able to plant into the identity of an individual the sense of reality and orientation. So that is why I think it was serious. It is important that we talk about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In terms of the teaching profession, it doesn't matter what you go on to do in life. Every child, every person, every human being has to enter through an educational setting. They have to enter through school. The school and education and teachers, those who are developing the minds of young children and helping to formulate and set the stage in which they're going to move out into the rest of the world there beyond, has a huge amount of it's so significant. It's more significant than we could ever imagine. We're talking about self-esteem. We're talking about self-worth. We're talking about self-value. We're talking about being able to understand who you are, where you come from. And author Chimamanda Adichie says that stories can be used to malign, stories can be used to imprison, stories can be used to do a lot of harm and can invoke great danger. But stories can also empower, stories can also repair what's broken, and stories can also help people walk into a space of humanity. And so school is a lot of times where these narratives or stories are told. Now, if we talk about many African Americans in the United States, particularly in the South, in the Southern region, states of Virginia and Maryland and New Jersey. I mean, not New Jersey, but Virginia, Maryland, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, South Carolina, North Carolina, so on and so forth. Education was forbidden. Education was something that was not allowed for those on the plantation, those who were enslaved. So what was it about education that was so important that only certain groups of people had the opportunity to have it? They had the privilege to be able to receive it. And then other groups did not have an opportunity or chance to embark upon learning about who they are and to be educated. And so, as I mentioned before, it didn't necessarily stop the striving and the plight to be able to learn, but that was huge. And so we're in a situation now where education is it shapes how you think, it shapes how you view yourself, it shapes how you relate to other people and how you connect to other people. And so as we think about where we are in 2022, we still have these battles about what is appropriate to teach, what should not be taught. There's something called critical race theory that is a buzzword, and it's a contentious topic spoken about here in the United States. And so there's school districts and school jurisdictions that are trying to hinder the conversation about race relations, and how that impacts the social structure that we find ourselves in. And I can say as a teacher, as an educator, it's so much more than grading papers. It's so much more than lesson planning. It's so much more than giving a presentation. It's so much more than knowing the students' names in your classes. A lot of the times, we are the first line of support for our students. A lot of times, it's us. They may tell us stuff that they may not tell their own parents or families. It's us who help them, who build them up and give them a sense of self. And it's us, educators and teachers, who have to hold space for them and be available to them and listen to them and talk about real life experiences and circumstances, and not just those things that are within the curriculum or the things that they're supposed to be taught. And as we see now, there's so many needs that our children have. And so there's the mental health, the social, emotional, the psychological, there's the physical. There's so many different layers to our students. We have to be able to engage with them on all those levels to address the student holistically, because they're human beings, and us as human beings, there's many different aspects or many different facets to who we are. So it's a huge, huge, huge job. And at times, you'll probably hear a lot of educators say that it's not always the most thankful job. It's a thankless profession. Some may say they don't pay enough in the profession. And you find that so many educators are giving so much of themselves. It's leading to burnout, and it's leading to them really getting tired, being taxed, and being drained. And that's why in many school jurisdictions and in many school systems within the United States, there is a significant teacher shortage happening right now as school is about to begin, and as teachers and families of students prepare to go back and begin school again.
There is a lot there. You see, sometimes people don't take the time to reflect on how we get to where we are today. And the consequence of that is that we risk not even knowing where we are going, because until we know how we get to where we are, we can't figure out how we move on from this point. Because, for example, you see, okay, I don't want to take the argument further away into political arguments and all that. Somebody would say, why is it that some African American behave in certain way? Why is it that there are poverty in certain communities among the African American? But people have refused to understand where we are coming from. That for several years, several hundreds of years, people were denied education, whereas others were given education. It's that the society is saying, to you, I don't care about you. To the other one, I care about you. So I'm going to give you the tools, the instruments you need to survive as a human being. Then at a point, you mix both of them together to function. It's going to be by miracle that that society can function. Because you didn't give the same tools you give to other people to survive to the other part, which are still members of your society, and you want to get the same result from them. It is not even naturally justified. I mean, it is not justifiable. Why I'm saying this is that, some people think that because you are a black person, you are an African, you are somebody coming from an African heritage, you have certain color, that is why you might have a defect in the way you reason. It is not true. How we reason is a product of both our society and the kind of education we are giving. If we are given a proper education, and the education in this sense become a tool for us to be able to navigate the society. If we are given a good education, there is no way we cannot figure out our way. But if we refuse this in infancy, under the pretense of certain law, certain code, certain discriminatory system, we cannot pretend when we start getting the result that is soft standard. This is part of the society. It has been structured like this. So I think we need to understand also that part. That for several years, the society has been configuring it like this, to be like this. It is not a mistake.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not a mistake. And there are scholars, there are those who have really put a lot of research and study. They've written books, the likes of which I like to delve into and read in my own right, where it's been said that this is all by design. The system is set up in a way to give certain groups the wealth, the access to resources, the access to education, amongst other things, at the expense of the other group not having the opportunity to receive and be benefactors of those things. And so education is just one example, but you can look at a number of different industries, the medical industry, the entertainment industry. You can look at the legal profession. If you look closely into it, you can see that racism and that institutional discrimination still rearing its ugly head again. I agree with you in terms of it really being important to talk about history and how there's a residual effect of how history affects us today. Because what is important to understand is that when we speak about Black teachers not being allowed to teach and Black children and Black students not being allowed to learn, there were laws in place with very harsh, violent consequences if these laws were broken. So the research and the data and the historical accounts talk about children having to hide spellers and books underneath their hats. And if they were caught, their limbs could get cut off or they could get dismembered. We're talking about being imprisoned and being put into jail if you're found with pamphlets and literature and reading materials. We're talking about having churches being burned down. We're talking about having schools being burned down. We're talking about that white surveillance and being fired for trying to find ways to insert into that biased curriculum things that are going to raise and uplift the minds of those Black children. We're talking about even educators even being killed, all at the hands of trying to deposit in the mind of these children positive things, trying to help them understand who they are, helping these children to cultivate their self-worth. And we find that the struggle was not just with the teaching aspect, but even educators who were activists and who advocated for other teachers, whether it was being able to have equal pay or equitable pay or equitable salaries, or being able to have suitable living conditions, or advocating for all different types of resources so that way these schools could be safe spaces and safe zones, resources for the maintenance and the upkeep and the overall structure of the school. This was in many ways the reality of many African Americans who were trying to learn.
To be a great content creator in today's fast-changing economy, you need one thing: storytelling. Storytelling is a powerful instrument to leverage either for personal use or for your business success. This is why this training class, Storytelling for Content Creator and Digital Entrepreneurs, was created. It is designed to help you leverage the power of storytelling so you can stand out from the crowd and earn more in your business. Come to obehi1food.com/storytelling and learn how to leverage your storytelling skill to earn more as a content creator and digital entrepreneur. You need the power of storytelling to stand out in the competition. So let's explore it together. See you in the class.
And so you look at South Carolina in the Deep South, 1740 was when it issued its first anti-literacy laws. And you look at the reason why it issued its first anti-literacy laws. The year prior, there was a rebellion called the Stono Rebellion, and you had Africans who revolted. It was an uprising, and they discovered that some of those who led the charge were supposedly those who had some level of literacy. So they were able to link literacy and the capacity and the ability to read and write with those who may be leaders and those who may be leading the charge when it came to uprisings and revolts. It's August, and in a few days ago was around this time years and years ago the Nat Turner uprising, which was in Southampton, Virginia. And Nat Turner, for those who don't know, was a minister. He was enslaved, but yet he could read. He had some literacy, and so he led the charge. 60 whites were killed, and many whites were afraid. They were scared. And once they executed Nat Turner, once they got a hold of him, they intensified the laws, implemented slave codes, and did all of those things, all at the hands of keeping these Africans from having a chance to be able to be literate. And so there's a book that speaks a lot to that called Fugitive Pedagogy, Carter G. Woodson and the Art of Black Teaching. It speaks to a lot of what I'm saying, just basically having to read and write and grapple with literacy under violence and under the threat and the danger. And as I said already, there's so many historical accounts, being beaten for trying to learn how to read, receiving lashes, and being whipped, all to learn how to read, being sold away. So we find that history, what happens in the past just doesn't stay in the past. Our bodies are containers and store our experiences, the events that happen to us, and all the things that we undergo. So when a group of people has had to deal with that, that's traumatic. That is a fearful, frightening ordeal. So this stuff is passed down from generation to generation to generation. And we still see history play out today because there's still books that are being banned in schools, and many of which are from Black writers and Black authors. I already mentioned about CRT and how that is a contentious topic of today. There's a teacher shortage, and that we talked about before in the past. There was a Black teacher shortage when it came to integrating public schools in the 60s and all through that time period. So society continues to repeat itself over and over. But if we don't know the history, and if we don't understand where we come from, then we'll fall victim, and we'll be befuddled and puzzled and confused at what is happening before our very eyes. And so when we talk about trauma a lot of times is stored in our brains. It affects our bodies. And so it's no wonder why a lot of teachers and educators, Black educators and teachers, may not want to go into the school system, because they might not have had the best experience when they were in school. And so why enter into that space, enter into that arena, if that is what your recollection, your memory is? And it's not to say that that's applicable to all, but these are some of the things that we have to talk about when we talk about the reality of education for Black folk, African American, those of African descent, whatever we want to call it. Historically here in the United States, it's so inspiring and it's so courageous to hear those stories of how, even though there was the threat and the danger and the violence that was there as a consequence if you were caught, they still stopped at nothing to learn how to read, write, and how to express their natural right to be able to be educated.
Thank you so much for that, dear Marcus. This is so important. This is important because we are looking at the historical experience the experience that people have gone through. Of course, now we are looking at it as history because it happened in the past. But it is highly important because it affects the kind of life that we live today. This is why I think the society, I mean, the institutions that are responsible for how the society is run should hold themselves accountable for the malfunctioning of the society, because that is why they are there. Nothing here is a mistake.
Yes.
The fact that they refuse to educate the Black people is not, and they didn't know that this was going to have consequence. This too is not a mistake. They knew that they were going to have consequence. Because if they didn't know, they didn't need to educate anybody. So education should not even be taught in the school. If the United States is spending a lot of money to educate its population, the white population, it means because the people know that educating the people is the right thing to do. So if you are segregating some people, not giving them quality education, it means you also know what you are doing, because you don't want quality from those kind of people. It means you are responsible for that. It is not by accident. Anyway, another thing I'm going to ask you is, what formed your identity? Because now you are an expert in this area, in the education, in history. You have grown in this area now. You have gotten a lot of experience here. You can speak on the issue. But I'm trying to understand, before you get to this level, what formed your identity? What were the things that influenced you for choosing what you become today?
That's a great question. And so as I grew up, And as I went to school and my later years, once I got past elementary and middle school, uh, or you could say, it started in middle school. I was a student, but I was really into sports. I was really into basketball. I played on teams and we traveled. And my interest in playing basketball really carried over into high school and into college. So I put a lot of time, effort, and energy into the game of basketball. There's those in my family who played basketball. And so you could say, in a sense, I was following the tradition, but I really enjoyed the play. But one of the things that I noticed, though, when I was in college, was that there was a certain kind of mindset by a good number of teammates who were on my teams. And anybody who knows anything about me knows that I played on a lot of different basketball teams. I went to different colleges and stuff, and uh, played on different teams. And I noticed that many of uh, my Black teammates, good guys, but I noticed many of them were on the team trying to make it out of their situation, trying to make it out of a perhaps not so good environment back at home. Perhaps they probably weren't gonna be even going to college if it wasn't for that scholarship or what the game of basketball could offer them. But with many of the other teammates I had who weren't, Black, such as myself, I noticed that it was different for them. They weren't on the team necessarily for, trying to make it out of a rough environment. It wasn't so much a state of desperation. It was more leisure. It wasn't as much of a sense of urgency behind it. Maybe they already knew once they graduated college where their life was going to end up or what path they were going to go down. And so I started to think about that, especially as I got towards the end of my college years. And even myself, even having a family that was supportive and caring and available and involved in my life significantly, I thought, for quite a while that the only few options for me was to be a professional basketball player. I wanted to go to the NBA. I rapped. I like to rap. Make music, and my scope and the scope of my teammates was very narrow. And so what inspired me, to your question, what inspired me to begin to transition a little bit more so into the educational arena is because I wanted, as I began to uh, engage with information that went against what I thought, it really impacted me in quite a way. My uncle Harold Bennett, who has passed on, but when he was living at the time, he put me on to different Black authors and Black writers. I began to, in college, read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And so I think also being exposed to literature, being exposed to content that really spoke to things I could relate to. And it spoke about African history and culture in uplifting and in positive ways. And when I went to Bowie State University and HBCU in Maryland, a historically Black university, and I was mentored by certain professors and different people, and I would talk to them after class, and I would talk to them during their office hours. We had conversations about things that I hadn't had before. And so all of these things were turning in my mind at once, and I began to put the pieces together. Um, and so there's a gentleman named Elder Kazuma Furlow, and he lives in Kansas City, a place in United States. And he actually gave me an opportunity. I met him online, and he gave me an opportunity to take what I was learning and to be able to share it with a group of people that he was going to be presenting to. And so it really wasn't one thing, but it was a series of a number of different occurrences and a number of different situations that really added up to lead me into this path that I'm on currently. And so I saw that once again, the scope was so narrow, and many of my teammates in beyond only thought that they could be successful dribbling a basketball or catching a football or being an entertainer. And not to knock those things, but there's so many other things that you can do to be successful. But I had to go into history. I had to read up on history more to understand all the range of different things that those of African descent have contributed, those that they have things that they have invented, the things that they have done in a positive way to impact themselves and their community. And so that experience was transformational for me. And so here I am now, just continuing on that path, because history really shapes the foundation in which we operate and in which we live on an individual level and on a collective societal level. We are born into situations based on decisions and choices of those who came before us. And so a lot of times I believe in education and in other areas, we put the cart before the horse, so to speak. In other words, we do all this talk about certain things happening right now in the present, but we don't go back and understand how we got here. So that's why the term Sankofa, which means as we go and move forward and embark upon the future, we must never forget where we come from, and we must learn and connect with our history. I believe that is really foundational and is really applicable to any human being, not just an individual, of African descent, all ethnicities, nationalities, walks of life, and backgrounds. I believe that the more you can understand your past, the more clear vision you can have as you propel yourself to the future.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. I really do. Okay, you're a historian today, and we are coming to talk more about that now.
Sure.
As a historian, predominantly of African American area of history, what kind of background do you want to give us on that? I mean, what do you want people to know about African American history? Help me with that.
For so long, those of African descent, once again, based on curriculum and based on denial of being able to tell our own story, denial of opportunities and access to things, there's been a dominant narrative, or there's been a string of narratives that have suggested those of Blacks of African descent are intellectually inferior. They're subhuman. They're impervious to pain. They can take, larger amounts of pain. They don't have the capacity to have relationships or to love. They're not human beings, or they're criminals. They're thugs. They're hoodlums. They're ghetto. And so we see that even in academia, those who were deemed as scholars, those who were deemed as historians in the field, pushed forth these false narratives. And there's all types of historical accounts. William Dunning of the Dunning School, and other individuals, white individuals, that spoke about the inferiority of the African race based on their skull capacity and their brain size, and that they're primitive, savage-like, barbaric individuals. I mean, these are things that were actually pushed out in educational settings and in educational spaces in higher education. And so I'm just a continuation. What has inspired me are the shoulders that I stand on. Carter G. Woodson, Benjamin Quarles, Frederick Douglass, uh, the long list of historians that have come before me, Asa G. Hilliard, uh, Dr. John Henrik Clark, Cheek Anta Diop, so many that have come before me in their own way and in their own lane, whether it was history, whether it was psychology, whether it was education, whether it was archaeology, or whatever it was, they used their skill set as a professional in their area to uplift the race and to uplift um, the African or those of African descent. And so for me, I like to use my scholarship, my findings and research and history to bring forth humanity and to restore the humanity in terms of how Blacks of African descent are viewed, seen, and treated. And my aim is not just to stop there, even though I consider myself a Black man, I consider myself to be African American, of African descent. I believe that the story that I seek to uncover and the narratives that I'm trying to recuperate are stories that all people can look at, reflect on, and can analyze and apply to their life in the present, in contemporary times. I believe history is instructive and it can inform us of how we can operate, how we can move and navigate our reality in current times. And so I try to use history as a way to connect people. I try to use history as a vehicle to heal people. And it doesn't mean it's easy work, because when there are certain things ingrained, certain things that are, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I have to be twice as this or twice as that. And there's even been research that has been done where they've taken children, Black children, and have given them a standardized test. And they ask these children questions. And from just asking them what race they identified with, it automatically triggered a response in these children. They got anxious. They had performance anxiety by identifying with that stereotype. They had a hard time putting their best foot forward, taking that test. But it had nothing to do with how, with where they were intellectually, but it had to do with the stigma. It had to do with the label. It had to do with the stereotype and what had been internalized. And so racial battle fatigue and just the taxation and stereotype threat and all of these types of things a lot of times are leaning on people, especially Blacks of African descent. And I'm not trying to generalize. I don't want to say that those who consider themselves Black are a monolith, and that everybody thinks the same, and that everybody's experiences are the same. However, even the research supports that history and how we view the past and the stories that have been passed down from generation to generation impact health outcomes. I just came across an article the other day that said racism and day-to-day discrimination in time impacts the memory with marginalized groups and groups that have been uh, 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 done disrespectfully and that have been done wrong when it comes to racism and discrimination and all those types of things. There's even research that even says that, those of African descent are more susceptible to stroke and heart disease and kidney issues and all types of conditions of the body based on having to deal with this stuff long term. But we a lot of times think, oh, well, it's just hereditary. Oh, it just runs in my family. Oh, that's just the way it is. And no, I would suggest and argue that, Well, yes, there are some things that may run in our family, and you know, there are a lot of different reasons and that lead us to be the way we are in terms of our health and our wellness. But what I would also insert that we oftentimes overlook is the intergenerational historical trauma too, that we also have to take into account, that is carried over from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. And they've studied mice in cages, they've studied Holocaust victims, they've studied Native Americans who have been pushed off the land, they've studied Black folk, and the data reveals in all of these different facets that what happens yesterday impacts you today. There's not a hard break from history. So no matter how you try to get over it, how you try to get around it, avoid it, deny it, it's still stored in the brain. It's still stored in the memory. It's still stored in the body. And there's things that you can do to work through that so you can still operate on a high level and all of that. But I would say the first thing we have to do is acknowledge and confront and address that of the past. And a lot of times we don't do that.
Thank you so much for that. And this is why we have people like you to talk to us about history. I think those who run the society are well aware of this. Okay, now let's take a simple thing, in line with what you were referring to, the research that these epigenetic traumas, really, they are there. Of course they are there. Those who perpetuate this trauma know that they are there. And, when they were taking away Africans from Africa who were going to be enslaved, they have to maltreat them on the way. They have to rape them a lot. Both men and women were raped. Of course, I'm not saying all, but these are messages, these are signals, these are not mistakes, these are deliberate attempts to send a message to their DNA. These messages live for generations and generations.
Yeah.
This deliberate brutalization of a certain group of people is not a mistake. The other day we were talking about the death of Steve Biko. We said, okay, first of all, Steve Biko was not really a militant in the sense that he didn't have any gun. He was not shooting at the police. But look at how they killed him. Now, Steve Biko was talking about the dignity of the African people. That was the key message. The respect of the African people. We can all live together, but you need to respect me as I respect you. Don't dehumanize me. Now, guess how they killed him? They killed him dehumanized. This is to say, this too is not a mistake. For the fact that Steve Biko was not wearing clothes when he died is not a mistake. This is a message. Yeah. You see, all these things are happening. It's not random. They have studied it. They have known that the punishment that they are giving to us, they are not giving to us just for now, but they want to send a message back so that it remains with us. So that this epic genetic trauma is a deliberate, they know that it's going to work. That is why they are doing it. They are carrying out this violence because they have studied it, knowing that it is going to work. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. They don't make me. These guys are intelligent. Those that run the system, even those that perpetuate the Ku Klux Klan, the hanging of people on the trees. All these things have been studied. They didn't make any mistake. All right, that is just for that, in terms of the research, that all these are proven. They know what they are doing. The trauma that the policeman need to sit on top of a person until the person dies is not a mistake. He's not a baby. He is a trained police officer. He knows what he's doing. If he doesn't know what he's doing, he should not be receiving salary. They undergo check.
Well,
please go.
Well, as you say that, I would say this. The acts of the dehumanizing acts that have been done to Blacks of African descent have been so heinous, have been so harsh, have been so abusive and have been just so inhumane that, and Asa G. Hilliard, uh, our, the beloved ancestor Asa G. Hilliard, speaks about this in his work, in his writings, and in his research. You have to almost dehumanize and miscategorize and mislabel somebody to then treat them in this way, because it's almost so heavy of a violent act and a way that you're dealing with the person to not almost creates the dissonance, if that makes sense. So if I do wrong to a person, it's going to make me feel a little bit better to say, well, they're not a human, they're subhuman, they're beneath humanity, I'm going to dehumanize them, so that can justify why I am giving the mistreatment. They're an animal, they're attacking me, they're competition, they're threat, they're dangerous, they're not safe to be around. So that's why I can over police their community. That's why I can pull them over on the side of the road and brutalize them and arrest them if I don't have the proper justification to. That's why I can lock them up into prison. That's why I can push forth the discriminatory, negative stereotypes in the educational setting. And so I believe that is what we see play out in many instances. And so I definitely see what you're saying. There's a lot of intentionality behind what is happening and what is going on. And with my students, with my educators, those who I consult with my business, History Heals Consulting, historyhealsconsulting.com, for those who want to see what I offer and the supports that I give. I oftentimes say the system is going to be the system. Those who are controlling the game board and those who were overseeing the structure, they're going to do what they're going to do. But what can we do within our control and within our capacity to show our agency and to impact and influence outcomes in a healthy way? And I believe there's a lot of things that we can do. And I think that also comes full circle with how we look at history. When we look at history, a lot of times the narrative is from a passive, victimized type of state. We were just beaten, we were whipped, we were brutalized, we were hung, we were lynched, we were raped. And yes, these things happen. But as we grapple with history and as we have a more critical assessment of what happened in the past, it's also important to know that there is a thing called Black joy, and that there were relationships that they had. They did try to carve out educational spaces to teach themselves. They did have cultural values and rituals. They were thinkers, and they did resist, and they did push back, and they did escape, and they did in clever ways confuse the slave owner. So it's important to also speak to that as well too, because if we don't, then we'll just perpetuate giving the status quo the power to say, well, we did nothing. We were just passive victims. And I would say that that's not the case. But we have to, once again, look into history and recover what has happened to know, well, we did have victories. The Haitian Revolution was a victory. The Harlem Renaissance was a victory. The Negritude movement was a victory. The activism and the things that happened in South Africa those things were victories. We can look at Marcus Garvey and what it was that through the channels of Garveyism, and August is his birthday month. So also special shout out to the ancestor Marcus Garvey. These are victories. There were more uprisings and revolts than we can imagine. Black folks have been music people. We've been writers. We've been thinkers. We've been intellectuals. We have been movers and shakers. We have been trailblazers. We have been doing all of those things. And it's important to also bring that into the story. So we're not romanticizing. We're not polarizing, but we're humanizing. We can talk about slavery. We can talk about how we've been persecuted, how we've been decimated, how we have been racially profiled, and how we've been victims of all of that stuff. But we also can create space to talk about the fact that, okay, well, these are the traditions that were passed down in my family that are important to me. Even though I was going through this harsh situation, we made music and we cooked food, and these were our rituals of how we came together. These were the spiritual practices that we implemented. This is how we healed each other when we got sick. It's important to speak to all of that if we want to say that history is rich. We can't just look at history when it makes us feel good, or when it's blaming somebody else. If we want to really have a critical, rich, robust understanding of history, you have to look at it all. And that's what I suggest.
Thank you so much, dear Marcus. This also is very powerful. Now, looking at it all, of course, my next question is going to be what you remember learning about Africa. This is for the fact that we are talking about history. Now, there is one trick that a lot of Europeans use, or Westerners, let me put it in general, is that they try to tell the African Americans that their history started from slavery. Anything other than that is just black, nothing. And they propose the same thing in Africa, actually, that our history started from colonialism. Anything other than that is really not there. But this is a trick. It's a trick to cut us off from our root. And when somebody is cut off from his root, you have nothing anymore. You are standing in the air. And if you are standing in the air, even the mere breeze that is not even strong can wave you to any direction. But now, this is a people that have thousands and thousands of years of history. So, if we have to talk about history, are we really talking about just slavery and colonialism? Because I say often here, if we were to take up the history of Africa and also look at colonialism and slavery, these two episodes are going to be like a dot, even too insignificant in the line of things in African history. Because our history have been dated down thousands and thousands of years. So I come back to the question. What do you remember learning about Africa in the United States?
Well, I'll say this, and I referenced my uncle Harold Bennett, who put me on to a lot of reading materials, a lot of literature, and a lot of scholarship. And so one of the books that he put me on to was a book that I have right here. It's called Nile Valley, Contribution to Civilization, and it's by Anthony Browder, who was still living, doing a lot of work in Egypt, or thousands of years ago, it was considered Kemet. But what I've learned, I spoke a few moments ago about the victories and how there were so many illustrious accomplishments and achievements that we can look at, that a lot of times those stories go untold. I remember when I was a college student, I was given an assignment to look up European and Greek philosophers. I was, Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, Schopenhauer, Immanuel Kant, all of these European philosophers. But what I discovered when I did some research and some homework on some of these individuals, I found that many of their philosophies and many of their thoughts and many of the things that they incorporated into the things they were doing or borrowed from Africa.
Do you know that telling a story is one of the most powerful ways to connect with your audience? Do you know that the human brain processes story much more easily and quickly than facts and figure? Stories are a great way to engage your audience, get them interested in your products and services, and inspire them to take action. A good story will help you create more compelling content that can be shared on social media or through other channels. And it's not just about telling a compelling story, it's also about knowing how to tell it effectively. Now, do you want to better connect with your audience? Then join us on our online training class, Storytelling for Content Creators and Digital Entrepreneurs. Come to obehi-1food.com/storytelling and learn how to leverage your storytelling skill to earn more as a content creator and digital entrepreneur. Storytelling is a powerful way to connect with your audience, so let's explore it together. See you in the class.
And as I thought about that, as I thought that was so intriguing, so interesting, I just thought that I said, wow, I think these guys have a lot of good philosophies and ideas, but there were ties taking them to Africa. They had to come to Africa and sit at the feet of those master teachers and those who were there. As you mentioned, we can go to Africa and see that thousands and thousands and thousands of years before Europe even assembled itself, there were, Kush and Nubia and Ethiopia and the Nile Valley region. All throughout those things, you see civil, and we haven't even talked about Mali, Songhai, and Ghana. We're talking about civilizations that help to bring in agriculture. They help to usher in art, concept of spirituality, healing modalities, mathematics, science. The list goes on and on and on. So when we talk about what Africa has given the world, we're talking about the foundation. And so the point of reference, it's healthy to go to Africa to see that Africa was the beginning. Scholars have referred to it as the cradle of civilization. And so many things that the world has been able to utilize has come from Africa. Not everything, but many things. And then there's scholars. There's books like How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney that speaks about how in order to get access to Africa, you had to find a way to invade and underdevelop it. Stolen Legacy, I believe that's George G.M. James, that speaks about, once again, the theft and that which was stolen from the continent of Africa. We look at the slave trades, the transatlantic and the sub-Saharan. So you find that the scramble for Africa, why is everybody trying to go to Africa? So to me, it's kind of hypocritical. If Africa is so jungle-like, if it's so barbaric, if it's so savage-like, why are everybody trying to get over there then? Why is everybody trying to get to Africa?
It's a trick. It's a trick. That is a trick.
They know exactly what they're doing, like you said. It's not by happenstance. But Africa, even of itself, and I hate to say this, but I think this is the reality. The ugly monster of racism, whitewashing history, colonialism, even though there's so much that has happened before the invasions and that happened before colonizing, and there's pre-colonial civilizations like we just spoke about, you still see in Africa and in other places around the globe. Once again, the internalization of this stuff. I believe it might have been Nigeria. I was looking into some things, not too long ago, and I believe skin bleaching is a huge, huge phenomenon there in Nigeria, trying to lighten the skin color. And so once again, it's a lot of healing work to be done, a lot of historical reclaiming and recognition, and a lot of reckoning, reconciliation. And so once again, I love history. I think that history is a very underutilized vehicle that really has a huge impact with how we think, our worldview, our beliefs, our actions, and our behavior. And what I always urge people to do is, let's stop and slow down long enough to process this stuff. Let's deal with this stuff. Let's understand how we got to this point, not just on a collective level, not just on a societal level, but on a personal level. And my life, your life, there's all stuff that we have dealt with, and we might be angry, we might be anxious, we might be resentful, we might be bitter, we might be shy, we might be timid, we might be whatever the emotion is. And a lot of times our emotions send us a message from that which we might need to look into historically in our own lives that may not have potentially been addressed or dealt with. So our bodies, once again, I said this before, I'll say it again, our bodies are always storing stuff. Our bodies, our muscles, our joints, our ligaments, all of our organs, it's storing that which happens to us. So that's why I say from a wellness standpoint, meditation is helpful, movement, exercise, journaling, expressive writing. It's cathartic, it's therapeutic, getting therapy, connecting with people, having groups to talk about stuff, being amongst nature, getting sleep, getting rest, reading up on history, not just history that makes you feel good. These are the things that we can do to continue to, establish healthy practices for ourselves, so that we can be able to live in an optimum state of wellness. And so we can not be so reactionary to what happens to us, but so we can live life on our own terms.
Powerful. That is powerful. Because we are natural. We are part of nature. Going to nature to regenerate yourself is just doing the right thing. It's a natural thing.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Because we are talking of history, I'm trying to see who you could have learned from, who could have inspired you, who you could have read more about as in the past. No, this of course can be in America or in the diaspora. It can be anywhere. So I'm trying to see who did you like to read much about that we can also learn from.
Sure. And there's some books of mine over my shoulder there. My wife, she probably wants me to get rid of some books. So I've mentioned some books right now, but man, there's so many books out. So, one of the individuals that is really significant to me, and whose life is very inspirational, is a person by the name of Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Dr. Carter G. Woodson is the father of Black history. He's the second African American to graduate with a PhD, Harvard University, 1912, and both his parents were formerly enslaved, and he would at Harvard challenge his teacher, his professor, when his professor said that those of African descent have no history. And so he fought against that. He said he was going to devote the rest of his life to pushing back against that. And he established an organization called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And they started to institute Negro History Week, which will be called Black History Month. So anyways, Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history, that is a work that I think is really significant. I'm an educator, and so I always like to speak to specifically the plight of African American educators, especially in the South, 1860 to 1935, speaking about how even under the thumb of slavery, there were efforts to try to become literate and trying to learn. I think James Anderson did a great job. Professor Anderson did a great job of breaking down how literacy was carried over into post-emancipation and once African Americans were freed. Another book I think that is good to have in your collection is African American Education in Slavery and Freedom, Self-Taught by Heather Andrea Williams. I think that's a great book as well to learn from. Another influential work, shout out to Resmaa Menakem, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. A book, let me see. There's so many works to get into. We'll be here all day if I if I go into all of the books. But what I would also say, not just from the books, but I would urge people to also try to delve into their family history. Talk to those in your family to understand who you are, where you come from. When Roots, the story of Roots from Alex Haley, when that was released in the 70s, I believe, that sent waves out into the public of those wanting to then grapple with genealogy and those who wanted to do family history work. And even now, with COVID-19 and people having lost their lives to COVID and all of what's been happening, as a way for people to find new meaning and to really appreciate who they are and understand their loved ones and their family, more have also started to get into family history. So I would say, even though there's books, what about the book of your grandmother or the book of your grandfather or the book of your uncle, the book that's inside their heads, their experiences, their stories, what they had to deal with? I mentioned it before, I don't want to just get stuck into the United States, because there's all types of great works, about, Blacks in the Caribbean, about Blacks from the islands, about the continent of Africa. So there's so much. And so there's probably some stuff, to be honest with you, that I'm not even remembering to share as well. But I'll just keep it short and say that you don't have to do it alone. You could also study and learn and read with groups of people, even if it's just two other people or one other person. And yes, and that's part of what got me into it, as I was coming in to understand a lot of this stuff as a college student, starting to really learn a lot of stuff that I wasn't really taught. I joined study groups and I joined think tanks, some would call it, to talk about what these books are saying, what these books mean, and tell your story, and what I mean by tell your story, Maya Angelou said, there's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. So what I take that to be is we all have our own story to tell. Slave narratives in the 1800s were accounts of those who were enslaved. Harriet Jacobs, Frederick Douglass, William Wells Brown, James W.C. Pennington, the list goes on and on. They took their personal accounts and their story and they wrote about it. and they used it to debunk a lot of myths about the institution of slavery. And so we all have our own life story. We all have our own ups and downs and natural things that we experience as part of life. Tell our story. Tell your story. Tell it. And when we can open up and be vulnerable, and when we can talk to people, those who we trust and whatnot, then that gives us the capacity to have deeper connections with people. And we can be able to share, whether it's through music, through song, through writing, through dancing, through cooking. Tell your story, and don't keep that pent up on the inside. So I'm just giving some things to think about in terms of, once again, how do we get to healing? How do we get to being able to be balanced and being able to move and operate in a holistic uh, means that would exude high level of wellness? And that's a journey that will always be on, because you never can be done growing and learning and whatnot. But there's definitely some things that we can do. And a lot of times it's not that we don't have the resources or the tools, but there's certain mindsets and certain things that we may have that might have us avoid things or run from things or put things off. And it could be scary, but in the long run, I think it'll be worth it.
Yeah, it's absolutely worth it. It's worth it. It's a story. I like books. I like talking about our history, because it tells us where we are coming from. I
Yeah.
like all the questions about history. And let me tell you this short one. How actually I started my literary journey. Um, I was, I think, about 6 or so. I saw my elder brother, who was going to secondary school then, actually primary school, not secondary school yet, because he's older than me with about 6 years. So he was going to primary school. But of
Hmm.
course, he could read and write. So I saw him reading. That was a magic for me. How could you read? Because now, as 6 years, I think 6 years or so, I only know that people could talk, people could communicate when one is talking to another person. Now I see my brother talking with him, just looking at the book, and something I didn't understand. That for me was a magic. How is it possible? Since that moment, and I begin to grow up, I have fallen in love with learning how to communicate. I've written a couple of books, and I still have a lot to write. I just love it.
Yes, I
I
do
just
too.
love it.
Well, I tell you, so I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I have a wife, and it's just the three of us. And sometimes I have to get up in the morning before my my wife gets up, before my daughter wakes up, and I have to read um, for me. And so I mentioned already before in our conversation what I'm doing now in terms of healing, History Heals Consulting, supporting people and aiding them and being able to support their mental health and their wellness using the lens of history. But from even my own personal life, reading settles me. It's like reading calms me, reading relaxes me. When I don't read, believe it or not, I feel different. I don't feel the same. I love to learn, and reading makes me think. And when I do get up in the morning, and when I am able to read a few pages or go through various texts and different things like that, it propels me better into my day. It's not always easy to get up, but it's worth it. Once again, and I think Malcolm X said it. Anything that's worth having comes with some form of struggle. So I might have to struggle for a few minutes to get up out of that comfortable bed and to go through that. But that time I put into reading is worth it. It's worth the sacrifice, and um, it's going to enable me to be a better person for myself, for others that I come into contact with, and it's continual development. And so reading, I love to read. If somebody asked me what my most sacred possessions or my most sacred belongings were, my library, my personal library is probably one of the most sacred, important things to me. Reading is probably one of the most uh, therapeutic things that I can do. And, I'm just the type of guy, I just like to be in spaces where there's books. I mean, if I'm in the library, if I'm at I like schools. I mean, I like, we here in America have stores like Barnes and Noble and, different places with books. I know Barnes and Noble's a pretty well known one, but any space where I'm near books, I'm good.
I'm talking of the healing and the healing with history, healing, history heal consulting. I want you to tell me something about that. I want you to use these few seconds to advertise that business. Let people understand how they should connect with you.
Sure. Well, like I said, I really appreciate you and your platform for having me on. I've definitely been enjoying our conversation. So, History Heals Consulting, and you could actually go to the website. It's History Heals Consulting, and it's all together, no space, .com, and you can be able to see the services that I offer. And so, History Heals Consulting is basically a business that is devoted to using history, as we've been talking, using the lens of history, primarily African American history, as a vehicle to aid and support schools, those who work in schools, businesses and companies, um, just better their environment in terms of wellness, in terms of mental health, in terms of fostering inclusivity. And I've found that there's a lot of need for that because in these workplaces, in these educational settings, there is a lot of people who feel devalued. A lot of people feel unappreciated. They're burnt out. I mentioned already how as we're going into the school year here in the States, many teachers are on their way out the profession. Many principals and many administrators are on their way out the profession. Um, Parents don't even know if they want to send their children to school. In fact, homeschooling has increased. So there's a lot of turmoil in these spaces. So History Heals Consulting comes to be able to use history to have these difficult conversations about race and racism and inequities and injustices. We could talk about these things under History Heals Consulting, and we offer wellness groups for those who want to support their wellness and their mental health by way of mindfulness and breathing techniques, how to ground themselves and how to be able to find ways to support themselves. Also, with professional development. So there's classes people can actually be able to have that I offer to be able to help us understand history and how it affects us in the present. I do speaking engagements as well, and I consult with museums and public history spaces as well. And so those are pretty much the four ways that you can get support. Once again, wellness groups. There's also classes and professional development that you can take, speaking engagements, keynotes, or speeches, or if you have a function, that's one way. And then the other way is consulting, working with museums. If you have an exhibit that you're putting up, or if you're trying to display something, or you're trying to make sure that what you're putting forth to the public is something that is telling a story in a just way, then that's another service that I offer. So you can reach out to me at info@historyhealsconsulting.com. If you want to send me an email, you can go to the website. I'm also on LinkedIn, which is how you and I connected as well. Yes, I'm also on Instagram. I'm on IG. That's at History Heals. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. But I would also say that there are other groups that I'm connected with as well too. And so if you reached out, and I'm sure that you can get some support from what I offer. And if not, then I could try to help you find what it is that you're looking for and what it is that you need. So glad to be back on the platform, man. I had a blast. I hope this isn't the last time we can do this.
No. Of course, we have a lot of things to talk about. Of course,
Yeah.
you are welcome. Most time when I have guests here, we spend a lot of time. We have a lot of things to talk about, so they usually come back.
Yes.
All right, that's why we are here. We are here at the service of the people to share information so that others can learn also from it. So we have the chance to talk to people like you. We are usually booking the second appointment after.
Okay. All right.
All right. So what is going to be your final thought here, considering what we have talked about today? It can be a message. It can be a kind of a line you wanted to reinforce. Please go ahead and do that.
I'm going to paraphrase a quote from James Baldwin, the writer, the social critic, the author. He said, "History is not the past. History is the present. We are our history. We carry our history with us." There's a lot of healing power that comes with understanding that where we come from. And in order for us to know where we're going, it is so critical and so important and so meaningful to understand where we've come. And so that being said, my name is Marcus Sankofa Nicks. I am representing History Heals Consulting. I'm delighted to serve, and I'm also a humble student as well. But I'm so glad and thankful to be on this platform. And I'm looking forward to more conversations, and I'm so appreciative. And I've just found another friend and another partner and another one to collaborate with here. So that is what I have. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure on my part. I really did enjoy it. So that we are going to have another one soon. Thank you.
All right.
If you enjoy this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any of our future episodes. Rate and review Obehi Podcast and share with your friends who might need it. I remain Obehi Ewafo. Thank you so much for listening, and talk to you in the next episode.